Thank you. Thanks a lot, Dana, and I didn't pay her to say any of that, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I'm sorry that William Howard Taft couldn't be here because as the first golfing president, he would have loved to have played in the Chamber of Commerce event this afternoon. I'm glad that Dana said a little bit about what the Secretary of State does because when you think about Secretary of State, you were probably expecting a speech about Ohio's foreign policy or Bosnia or the Middle East. And people are confused in Ohio about what I do. Some people last year in our focus groups thought I was in charge of relations with other states, relations with other countries. I have received mail down in Columbus addressed to Warren Christopher, the U.S. Secretary of State. And the highlight of my year every year comes in May when we celebrate National Secretary's Day, and I get cards from people throughout the state of Ohio. They want to hope I have a nice day and someone takes me out to lunch or dinner on that day. So it is an awesome job, but as Ohio's Secretary of State, I am delighted to be here at Ashland University, one of the finest institutions of higher education in our state, and also one of the most innovative as you reach out to students across central and northern Ohio, with 13 satellite centers going to where the students are, going to where your customers are. And I salute you for that. Oh, thank you. Let's hear it for Ashland University. But I am especially delighted to be at the Ashbrook Center. This center performs an invaluable role, not just in training our future leaders, but also in shaping the policies of our state and our nation. You have had extraordinary speakers at this podium. I have been fortunate to have heard a few of them: Bill Bennett, Colin Powell, John Engler. And I would like to commend in particular you, Charlie Parton, for your able and far-sighted leadership of the Ashbrook Center and for attracting so many outstanding leaders to our state. Thank you for what you do for Ashland and for our state. Certainly, John Ashbrook would be well pleased by this center's commitment to conservative ideals and conservative principles. John was a real fighter for the causes in which he believed, and I remember how hard he worked to elect my dad, Bob Taft, to the U.S. Senate against Howard Metzenbaum in 1970. We owe John Ashbrook credit also for laying the groundwork of much of today's conservative revolution. He truly was a Reaganite before Reagan, and his policies inspired the policies of the Reagan era and live on in the contract with America. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of an era in which government has tried but failed to be all things to all people. The new era which we have entered will require the federal government to refocus on the limited role that the founding fathers envisioned, and state and local government to rise to meet new challenges. The failures of the federal government are evident for all to see. Washington has damaged the economy over and over. It's overspent, overtaxed, overregulated, and overborrowed. It has been said that idealism increases in direct proportion to one's distance from the problem. Well, the federal government is distant, and it's out of touch. The bureaucrats who inhabit the corridors of power in Washington have no idea what is happening in Main Street, in Ashland, or Mansfield, or Canton, Ohio. And in seeking to solve every conceivable social problem, the federal government has not only failed, it has eroded the bedrock American values of hard work, self-reliance, and responsibility that have made America great. At the same time, it's the states that are being recognized as the places where things get done, and the governors are leading the way. Engler in Michigan, Thompson in Wisconsin, Whitman in New Jersey, Voinovich in Ohio, and other governors are pioneering innovative solutions to the problems of education, welfare, taxation, and jobs. In fact, the states do possess many advantages. They are focused on fewer goals. They're closer to the people, smaller, more manageable, and they are required to balance their budgets. John Ashbrook recognized this 20 years ago when he said, and I quote, that he would probably be more conservative as a congressman than as a state legislator. This is because I believe there are a lot of things the states should do, but the U.S. government should not. Well, finally, Washington is getting the message. 77 bills have been introduced to block grant programs back to the states. And you know the states have arrived when a presidential candidate quotes the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution in speeches across the country, as Bob Dole did during his announcement tour. This week, the Senate is expected to enact a welfare reform bill similar to the one the House has already passed. This action is long overdue. It was Franklin Roosevelt, of all people, who warned that welfare must not become a narcotic and a subtle destroyer of the American spirit. The federal government failed to heed his warning, and we've been paying the price for a long time. And it is the states, including Ohio, who are testing innovative solutions, incentives, and limits to move families off of welfare and into the job market. We can expect the revolution in Washington to continue, and Ohio must prepare now to take advantage of new powers and new opportunities and to reaffirm our position as a leader among states in the 21st century. We've enjoyed great prosperity in our state. Ohio is blessed with abundant natural resources, a great location in the heart of the country, a strong work ethic, and a good system of higher education. At the moment, the greatest threat to our cohesion as a state is the coming battle between the Reds and the Indians in the World Series, which will put some of us politicians on the hot seat. But this is no time to rest on our laurels. As Will Rogers said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. As we move closer to the next millennium, competition in producing quality goods at the lowest prices will become even stiffer. We'll have to contend with limited federal dollars. As power shifts back to the states, we'll have to use resources more carefully than ever before. And the economy of the future will demand more from our workers, more knowledge, higher skills, and greater creativity. To secure our future, we should focus on three things. First, continue the job started in Washington by shifting power and responsibility down to local governments, local communities, and to families across Ohio. Nowhere is this more essential than in education. Second, create an economic strategy for prosperity in the 21st century. And finally, transform state government itself to be a vehicle for continuing progress in the new era. Education is the key to higher productivity and higher family incomes. Common sense tells us that if we teach our children 19th century skills, they'll never be able to compete in a 21st century economy. Too many students are not prepared for work or higher education upon leaving high school. The Wall Street Journal reported just last Friday that Lincoln Electric in Cleveland can't find the workers it needs, having to reject thousands of applicants due to inadequate schooling. Some of even the better students are ill-prepared. Last year, more than 1 out of 5 students entering Ohio's public colleges and universities was required to take remedial math or English, a sad and a wasteful state of affairs. To improve our schools, we must direct power and responsibility to where learning occurs, in the home, in the classroom, and at each individual school. The state should set high standards and measure results, and those standards should not be dumbed down, as some school districts have tried to do by eliminating failing grades. I guarantee you, our competitors in Europe and Asia will not be grading us on a curve. But once standards are set, the state ought to get out of the way and actively promote choice for parents and competition and autonomy for schools. The state aid that is given to parochial schools and the school voucher pilot to be conducted in Cleveland expand choices for parents. So will the ability to create charter or community schools that is proposed in a bill enacted by the Ohio House and pending in the Ohio Senate. Charter schools are public schools sponsored by parents or community organizations and freed from the majority of state regulations. But really, all public schools should be free of most state mandates and encouraged to offer parents as many choices among schools and between districts as possible. Principals and parent groups should have the freedom to reshape their schools, creative to educate students for success in tomorrow's economy. I visited good schools all over the state of Ohio, some in wealthy areas, some in poor areas, some in safe neighborhoods, some in crime-ridden neighborhoods. Each one was led by an outstanding principal who had high expectations for student achievement and the autonomy to get the job done for their students. Similarly, when I taught school as a Peace Corps volunteer in East Africa 30 years ago, I got better results because I had the freedom to use innovative techniques for teaching English as a second language. Our large urban school districts are unmanageable. These districts should be encouraged to create smaller sub-districts, as Cincinnati has done with the first mini-district in the state of Ohio. State law gives that mini-district some freedom from state rules, and it is piloting a number of innovative reforms, including a year-round calendar in some schools. As an example of overregulation by the state, the director of that mini-district had to request a waiver from Columbus just to conduct intramural sports so that the kids could learn mutual respect and sportsmanship. We need to remind parents that they are their child's first and most important teacher, and if necessary, help them to prepare their children to succeed in school. As a parent, my greatest revelation has been the powerful and irreplaceable impact that my wife and I have had on my daughter, enabling her and supporting her to succeed in school. It's for that reason that I like the Parents as Teachers program, which has improved student performance in Missouri and is working now in Ohio. It shows parents how to help in their child's development. Empowering parents to give their children the best possible start in life may be the wisest investment that we make in the field of education. It is time for all of us to realize that what we do matters to our children. The movies we make, the television shows we watch, the language we use, the way we resolve our disagreements, all of this has an impact on our children. Too many of our children learn about law from the Simpson trial instead of the Constitution, take science lessons from ER instead of Einstein, and get their values from Melrose Place, not responsible adults. When we don't model good behavior, when we don't read to our children, when we don't insist on the basic tenets of character, our kids come to school unprepared. Now, I realize that not all kids have parents who make solid role models, and these children are everyone's responsibility. My office is doing its part for some of these children by adopting Champion Middle School in Columbus, where we tutor students, do job shadowing with them, and sponsor a summer reading program. Education may be our most important economic development tool, but there is far more to ensuring Ohio's prosperity in the coming century. We must concentrate on three sectors: manufacturing, small business, and emerging technology. The watchwords for our manufacturing strategy must be attract and grow. We must be alert to opportunities to attract new companies to our state. But just as importantly, we must help the companies who are here now to grow and expand jobs and production. The state must provide a good transportation system and other needed infrastructure. In fact, issues 1 and 2 on this November's ballot are directed at that goal. Regulation of business, where required, ought to be based on common sense. Ohio's workers' compensation system remains a disaster, a heavy burden for business and worker alike, and a handicap in our competition with neighboring states. It must be reformed once and for all. Excessive litigation costs must be brought under control, and our business tax structure must be aligned with the needs of a 21st century economy. The state should be especially sensitive to the needs of small business. It is smaller companies that will create 80% of the new jobs, and I know some of the businessmen or women are sitting here today. It is small business that is most damaged by clumsy regulation and most in need of assistance in cutting through bureaucracy. Mom and pop don't have the money to hire a legal department to run the government gauntlet of red tape. We must make it convenient to obtain permits and forms. By setting up one-stop shops, we can cut transaction costs for small business in Ohio. In fact, my office did so last year in cooperation with the Ohio Department of Taxation when we eliminated a duplicative filing requirement. Often, small businesses don't have the know-how to tap expanding export markets. The state can help them to export new products and find new markets outside our borders. Ohio should be a fertile field for entrepreneurs. The next Bill Gates might be sitting here in one of your classrooms at Ashland University. The state should make sure that entrepreneurs can gain access to the startup capital, the business know-how, and the skilled labor force they need to succeed. As a front door to business in Ohio, my office is doing its part to make Ohio more attractive for new companies, creating a new way to organize called the Limited Liability Company, and introducing new technology to cut turnaround time on business documents. Finally, Ohio must encourage emerging industries that will create high-tech, high-wage jobs in future decades. With our 13 state universities, 50 independent colleges and universities, and 3 federal research centers, Ohio should be a national leader in the development of industries based on new technologies. We must nurture our scientific and engineering talent and create a climate for the formation of new companies based on new ideas. As an example, research and development of polymers started many years ago in Ohio has helped to create a thriving economy in the northeast part of our state. There are almost as many people working in plastics manufacturing today as in blast furnaces and steel mills in that part of the state. Some say the next boom may be in the flat panel display industry, propelled by research going on at Kent State University's Liquid Crystal Institute. We need to use our network of university and government research centers to apply new technologies and market them to businesses throughout the state. Our third task is to reform government itself. In today's world, time is money. Whether it's business or government, the new era requires us to be leaner, more flexible, and more efficient to respond to the ever-changing economic climate. Unlike some, I believe government has certain jobs to do in our society. It should be big enough to do those jobs, but no bigger. Every program, every agency should be scrutinized to determine if it is really needed. If it is not, it should be eliminated, or in today's talk, de-invented. Government grows with abandon, and no one ever wants to kill a government agency. I have often thought, sometimes dreamt, that government needs a common sense commission made up of everyday people whose only job it would be to review all government projects and programs. If commission members thought they didn't make sense, the program wouldn't continue. And if necessary, the commission would have the power to call in the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, to get the job done. I think we ought to re-examine the very structure of our government. Can we really afford to have 22 departments reporting directly to the governor? Is that the most efficient use of our scarce resources, both human and financial? In the Secretary of State's office, we've thought about our mission and looked hard at our structure, and we've become more customer-directed. We combined our 2 largest sections into a single business service division to reduce overhead and be more flexible for our customers. We've cut staff by 15%, and we've improved the speed and accuracy of our service to the taxpayers. That type of eagle-eyed approach should be used at every level of government, and we must not be afraid to see reality. When the private sector can do a task better or more efficiently, the state should contract out or privatize that function. Whether it's the private management of our prison system or contracting out part of workers' compensation, we must look hard to discover new opportunities to do things better. If we are resourceful, there may be more jobs to privatize than any of us realize. When I served as a county commissioner, we relied heavily on nonprofit and charitable groups, contracting with them to provide services to the mentally ill and disabled and to abused and neglected children. And they did a good job. Perhaps most importantly, the state must play catch-up with the private sector in deploying the latest technology to improve the speed and quality of service it provides. In an age of global commerce, electronic commerce, the states that fail to take advantage of technology will be left in the dust. I have viewed with interest Ashland University's fact-filled homepage on the internet. That's the kind of innovation I'm talking about, and I'm pleased to report that our office will introduce our internet homepage this fall. We have also used technology in my office to increase public access to information. We've provided a 1-800 number for voter registration, computerized campaign finance reports, and we are currently implementing and really re-engineering our entire office to use computer imaging technology to cut by 50% the time it takes to return documents to our business customers. But we are barely scratching the surface. We're nearing a day of paperless transactions when corporations receive electronic charters to do business in Ohio, when Ohioans no longer stand in line to get their driver's license, but rather get it with the push of a button from a sidewalk kiosk, and when you reserve and pay for a room at a state lodge from your home computer. Ladies and gentlemen, as our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. Abe Lincoln spoke those words more than a century ago, but his comment rings true for us today as we enter a new era filled with great promise and great challenges. We must transform our schools, our economy, and yes, even government itself to meet the demands of the new era. But if we rise to the occasion, I know that our children and our grandchildren will live in a state that is a great place to live, and in a state where, with God, all things are possible. Thank you.
I have a question for you in your capacity as Secretary of State, in which office you're responsible. You have partial responsibility for helping to draw up legislative districts, as I understand it. Part of the great Republican victory last November, I think, was as a result of racially gerrymandered districts in which black Democrats wanted to be, of course this is nationally, not necessarily here in the state of Ohio, in which, black congressional Democrats wished to have their own districts. This, of course, made it more difficult for white congressional Democrats to win, and therefore, ultimately, Republican candidates were able to pick up lots of seats, mainly in the South, but also in urban and suburban areas. Could you comment on this practice of racial gerrymandering?
Well, first of all, thanks to most of the people in this room, when I was elected Secretary of State in 1990 and Governor Voinovich was elected, for the first time in 20 years, the Republican Party controlled the board that drew the state district lines for state legislative districts. They had been gerrymandered very greatly against us, and of course we as Republicans just drew fair districts for Republicans, and of course when they're fair, our candidates win, and that's one reason why we now have a Republican speaker, the first Republican speaker in the state of Ohio in 22 years. We sought to follow the state law and the Constitution in drawing those districts, and part of the reality with which we were faced at that time was the Supreme Court law, the case law, that said and told us, according to these decisions, that in drawing districts, whenever you could draw a district that would have a majority of a minority group population, you had to do it. Otherwise, your plan would be thrown out. And so we tried to conform with that when we drew our districts, because we certainly wanted our plan to be held up. And in fact, the United States Supreme Court, by a 9-0 vote, did sustain the Ohio plan against attack, although our opponents are still trying to raise the issue in the courts, but it's getting to be very late, and the Supreme Court recently put a stay on a lower court order with regard to that decision. It makes it very difficult when you're trying to draw districts that are equal in population, districts that are compact. It makes it very difficult to draw districts also that create a majority of a minority group whenever possible. And that has resulted in some really weird, crazy districts that just didn't make any sense from a geographic point of view, from the standpoint of cohesion, and from the standpoint of compactness. And I believe that the Supreme Court is looking at this issue very carefully. They've already, in a couple cases, set a signal that they're going to scrutinize districts that are drawn on the basis of race. And I think ultimately, unless someone can show that there was overt, intentional, explicit discrimination in a particular area by those against a minority in drawing the district lines, unless you can show that, I don't think you're going to be able to, in the future, sustain districts that are shaped in that way to try to aggregate unrealistically populations of minority groups. Other questions?
Do you approve of the Republicans' efforts to assist black Democrats who want to create virtually all black districts? Or do you think that these...
I don't look at it that way. I mean, what we did in Ohio, I don't know what other people are doing in other states. All I can say is we just tried to conform with the law. We weren't trying to create, a certain district for a certain legislator. In fact, we were trying to look beyond a particular legislator and to say, what would happen in this district if someone else ran in this district? We had to look at that under the law as it was. So we were limited in that way. I think districts, should not be drawn in an artificial way to aggregate populations like that in a way that just violates common sense and compactness just for that purpose, and certainly not in the absence of a past pattern of intentional discrimination against a particular group. Bob?
Mr. Taft, I'd like to ask you a two-part question. First of all, what is your position on affirmative action? And number two, if you were to become governor, how would you use your position or belief in affirmative action to affect present state hiring practices and present state university admission practices?
I believe in affirmative action in the traditional sense of reaching out and trying to seek qualified minorities, qualified women for jobs and for positions and for opportunities. I am opposed to rigid quotas, to set-asides, to reverse discrimination, and I think we need to work against those rigid requirements which, number one, may be unconstitutional, number two, often result in reverse discrimination against other qualified candidates, and sometimes work against the very groups that you're trying to assist. Other questions? Guess everyone's heading for the golf course. If not, thank you very much. I'll be here to answer any questions you may have.